Welcome everyone and good afternoon. My name is Andrea Engel. I'm the Senior Director for Global Contracts and Sustainability in Procurement for the KION Group. And today I have the pleasure, together with Tanja Fischer from Capgemini, to talk about our decarbonization journey in procurement and hopefully a best practice in manufacturing and how to become net zero by 2050. So we would like to take you on our journey, and so maybe, Tanja?
Thank you. My name is Tanja Fischer. I'm manager at Capgemini Invent for the topics of decarbonization and sustainable procurement. So supporting our clients in getting transparency on their carbon emissions along the entire value chain, on developing decarbonization strategies, and to also implementing those measures in order to reach their climate targets.
So KION Group is the leading supply chain solution provider with our forklift trucks, brands like Linde, Stihl, but also Dematic. We supply with our products customers in more than 100 countries. And by the end of 2024, we had 1.9 million forklift trucks and different warehouse equipment around the globe. With that saying, you can imagine that our supply chain is international and global. And so therefore, it was for us important to look into that also from a procurement and sustainability perspective. So strategic sustainability management was and is always a key factor of the KION Group, and since years we're looking into our greenhouse gas emissions. And by 2023 we committed to SBTi, and very proud to say that our roadmap had been validated by the end of 2024. So maybe you ask why SBTi? I know it's in discussion right now, but looking into SBTi, we had like three main criteria why we chose to do our path together with SBTi. So number one is if you look at the reporting, and especially now CSRD, you will see that they all request a scientific-based methodology when it comes to greenhouse gas emission calculation, but also reporting. Also, that is the case when you talk about financial institutions, such as Standard & Poor ratings do request SBTi when it comes to greenhouse gas emission. But then also we discovered that our customers specifically requested us as their supplier to provide an SBTi roadmap when it comes to greenhouse gas emission reduction. So with that, it was very easy for us to say we go for SBTi, and then by the beginning of 2024, we decided to partner together with Capgemini, who do have the knowledge and the expertise, looking specifically into procurement and their road to sustainability. And why procurement? We just figured out, and probably you know, because Scope 3.1 is known also as the hidden giant, 20% of our overall greenhouse gas emission from the company came from the upstream supply chain. So therefore, it was absolutely crucial to have a specific look into procurement and into our upstream supply chain. With Capgemini, we started our project PACER, which stands for Procurement Acceleration for Carbon Emission Reduction. And we had three main topics to look at. So number one was which target is feasible from a procurement perspective. So we had the feasibility study to make which year would be the one where we want to go for net zero. Would it be 2040, 2045, or 2050? And by that, we of course had to look into the costs and also to the risk for procurement. As you all know, the main target of procurement is to reduce costs. Still today, when we talk about green materials, we talk about a green premium, which is contradictory to the overall procurement goal of saving costs. So therefore, it was very important for us to look at the scenario, what it would mean for us when we would go net zero by 2040, 45, or 50, with look at the costs and at the risks. But then also, it was very important for us to look at the data and the technology that is needed to make that journey. Procurement is very intensive when it comes to data. With suppliers of around about 30 to 40,000 all about the globe, it is very important to have data and technology that is supporting that journey. Tanja.
So while the net zero target of 2050 seems to be a long time away, it is still crucial to get started now. Andrea just said it, the emission calculation that KION worked with until then was solely based on spend and on industry average data. So basically proxy data in order to get a rough understanding of where emission hotspots are. And while this is a very good start, it is yet crucial to enhance this with more accurate data, for instance from suppliers, so through primary data collection. And since this basis was not yet fully transparent, KION has decided to first, and we see that here, the first couple of years on that journey, to really focus on getting that transparency based on supplier data, to engage with first suppliers, because it also takes the suppliers a while to obtain that data on their product emissions and to develop their own carbon reduction pathways. And so the first focus is on getting that database straight. And then afterwards, as of 2030, there's of course a very heavy focus then also on reducing the emissions in procurement from the supply chain. And the project that we conducted together with KION on that was separated into two main focus areas. The first focus area was the supplier engagement, where we conducted decarbonization workshops with about 25 suppliers from over 10 emission-intense categories to get an understanding on their status quo in terms of, do they already have transparency on their product carbon emissions? Do they already have own climate targets, for instance? And do they already know how to come down with their emissions in order to achieve the long-term goals? And that was a very strong focus, and we generated some key insights on this journey together with the suppliers. So the first one was that we learned that there's a lot of suppliers already, especially for instance in the steel industry, that have their own ambitions already and that have a pretty clear target themselves, that already know how they want to reduce the emissions. And this is then something where KION will profit from automatically in terms of their Scope 3 emissions. And therefore it's important to know that, because that of course also shapes the KION strategy on how to reduce carbon emissions in their Scope 3. The second insight that we learned was that we talked to suppliers from all around the globe, many different regions, and there is not really a more sustainable or more unsustainable reason. It really depends on the suppliers. What we learned was that, in fact, one of the suppliers that is most advanced in terms of they know how to reduce the emissions within the next couple of years, and that at a more or less cost-neutral level, is located in China. So it does not necessarily mean that, for instance, the APAC region is less advanced or more advanced, but it really depends on the production processes that the suppliers are already using and on the reduction potentials that they have identified in their products. And the last main insight that we had, that even within one category, there are huge differences in the maturity of suppliers. So some of them were really a lot more advanced, while others were just at the start of their journey and needed a lot more enablement in order to understand how they can take their first steps. The second focus is put on operationalizing this. So that means that we try to implement the topic of emissions into the entire procurement process. So really starting from the sourcing to awarding, to in the end then making the decisions and purchasing, to start with the data collection, for instance, in every RFQ. So whenever there's an RFQ outgoing now at KION, there's the possibility to collect emission data in a standardized way through a tool, and then in order to also in the future make decisions based on that, bring that into the awarding decision making and into supplier development in the end. So basically what we did in that stream was to lay the foundation in order to bring the topic of sustainability, the topic of emissions, into every purchasing manager's day-to-day business.
So yeah, thank you, Tanya. So you just spoke about the challenges and the successes, and like in the real project, I'm the challenge, now you're the success. So bring it down into a nutshell, we deal with 5 key challenges. So first of all, is the data availability and the quality. Painfully, we had to learn that our data quality and availability was not as good as we thought. So missing data is one of the big things that could bring success or failure to a product. So this is something which we had to learn to be more careful about it. Internal stakeholder engagement, even though everybody talks about sustainability and thinks it's very important, when you talk with procurement about sustainability and possibly cost raise, nobody is happy about it. So bringing that people into the project from the very first beginning, make them aware that right now it might be an increasing cost, but it's a long-term project we're working on, is very important. But then also not only procurement, but also a lot of other departments are involved in that project from day number one. We talk about R&D, we talk about CTO in general, we talk about finance, controlling. So all these teams do place and do have a place in that project. Supplier majority, just as Tanya said, it's not forgiven just because you have a supplier in China, he is not sustainable. We have been told the opposite, actually. So therefore, supplier maturity is different, depending on the industry, depending on the size, depending on the country. Nothing is for granted. There are a lot of surprises. Then number 4, the tier N complexity. Also, in sustainability, we always have to go behind tier number 1, but we're only making and having a direct relationship with tier number 1, so our direct supplier. So how do we come behind that supplier? How do we know to get to know the supplier behind our supplier? A lot of difficulties. We're all painfully addressed by this when it comes to new regulations, but this is something that we had to look into, and how can we close that gap? How can we maybe jump over that? And then last but not least, although there are more challenges, but one of the key challenges is like talking about the tech solution, and you see it also here, there's no one fits to everything, no one sits sides. So therefore, it is very crucial to understand what are my requirements, what I precisely need to have to be able to make my work and to achieve the targets, and then looking into that solution that is providing that, and not just going for the best and most known. So it's really homework that we had to do as well.
So talking about the challenges, of course, we also learned a lot during that project, and we want to share 5 key success factors with you when it comes to approaching such a topic, maybe also in your company. So the first one, Andrea said it, it was a huge challenge to get everybody on board. So the first success factor on that is to really start involving relevant parties early. So as said, that can be R&D, that especially in our case was procurement, so category management, strategic procurement, but also operational procurement, to make sure that they understand what the requirements are, and to make sure that there's also their buy-in quite early, and you can start with the enablement early. And that also means that, of course, the communication then has to be frequent to make sure that they stay up to date, that they understand what the rollout plan is over the next couple of years, because such projects typically take a while until everything is really then also live and active in the tools, in the processes. The second thing that we learned is that it really helps to create success stories very early. That means that we try to start with suppliers that are maybe a little bit more advanced, that are very open to such discussions, that are usually rather open also to talks and negotiations with Kion, and where we could really show internally and externally that this is a huge deal, that it is a very successful project, and that there are really true valuable insights coming out of those discussions. The third one is related to the different supplier maturity levels, and that is really to engage the suppliers in a way that it makes most sense based on their maturity. So as mentioned, there are some suppliers that were not that advanced yet, that had no transparency, no idea where to start, and there we focused more on enabling them to take the first steps, because in the end that's something that Kion will also need to bring down emissions in their supply chain. And then there's others where it makes sense to focus more on maybe co-innovation, on driving this topic together, maybe even joint development, because they're a lot more advanced, and they can also bring their own ideas to the table, or they even have own solutions already from which Kion can profit. The fourth success factor is related to technology. So of course, when we talk about collecting primary data from 30,000 suppliers, it's not feasible to do that via email. So it really is important to leverage technology, also to go beyond tier one. So bringing this into either existing tools, we did that at Kion, bringing this really in their sourcing solution, in their supplier management solution, to also factor in this topic on procurement or emission transparency in procurement. And then last but not least, to try to integrate these new requirements and this new topic into existing processes, because it often doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It is more on making this one new criterion an essential part of the existing processes. So there's decision making based on a lot of different factors, but this is just one more criterion, and that makes it a lot easier also for the buyers to understand where this is coming from and how this should be dealt with, because it's actually familiar processes and it's just one new thing that basically has to be regarded. And last but not least, or the most important thing, the journey on decarbonization is really continuous learning and very iterative. So it is very important to start somewhere and then take it from there, and to get started and take the first steps first. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we still have about 2 minutes for questions, so if there's anything. Yes? Do we have a mic? Oh.
Can you hear me? You're right. Thank you very much for this nice and insightful presentation. I'm coming also from the industry side, and I'm coming from Asia. And I was wondering, when we come to the topic of supplier, at the end of the day, you need to look into what's the benefit also on the cost side. How do you really manage it? From which perspective can you say, even though it's more expensive, and then I still use sustainability, or must be at least cost neutral, then you make the choice for this supplier. What is the rationale behind how you choose a supplier on the monetary aspect?
Yeah. So we discussed that topic a lot, of course, internally, but also how to deal with this with the suppliers. And what we see is that a lot of suppliers have like two types of products: the more conventional ones on the one hand, and then the green ones on the other hand, and they are typically more expensive. But we also found a lot of examples where it doesn't necessarily mean that the more sustainable product has to be more expensive. To give you one example, we talked about increasing recycling shares of certain products when we talked about counterweights. So to increase basically the input share of recycled material, and this is in fact even cheaper for the supplier to work with that scrap material as input than to use primary material. So it really depends on the product, of course. It depends on which levers you have, but typically for a lot of suppliers, we notice that there are first steps to make the product more emission friendly without having to invest in that a lot. And that's of course then also something that the client benefits from when there's no premiums involved.
Maybe more critical question. Would you say if the price is more higher, would I go for that? Or would you say, no, it must be at least cost neutral, then it makes sense? Because at the end of the day, it's also about the dollars and cents. How do you see that?
Maybe let me quickly answer that. Right now, we haven't made a clear decision on that. I think the question is that if you look at the status today, the so-called green material is very expensive. If you look at steel, there's like a difference of 300 euros per ton. But this is the status of today. We're looking into a project that deals, with the next 25 years. So the idea was for us to say right now, we do not want to spend more, but we can start off, as just Tanya said, we look into those categories and products where we do not have to pay more. And then the matter of time will change the market. So the more people request that, the more availability is in the market, and then the price will drop. So we deal also with that time on our side thing, I would say. But right now, as we do not have a very clear approach to decarbonize a certain percentage by a certain year, so we have 2050 in our view, we do have more time to think about this, and then, maybe in 5 years, the situation looks different.
Thank you again for listening, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much.